The air in the room always seemed to shift whenever the topic of marriage came up. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the traditionalists who believed that a ring and vows were the natural next step. Every Sunday, as we gathered around the dinner table, my mother would casually bring it up, as if nudging the conversation in a direction she hoped it would go. She'd reminisce with that wistful, faraway look in her eyes, recalling her own wedding with a soft, almost secretive smile. "You know, Emily, your father proposed to me after just a year of dating," she'd say, her eyes momentarily drifting to Mark as if testing the waters. My father, always so supportive of the idea, would chime in, adding with that warm certainty, "and it was the best decision we ever made." Then, with a tilt of his head, he'd turn to Mark, his voice light but pointed, "What about you, Mark? Any plans for the future?" Mark, ever the master of deflection, would laugh it off, effortlessly changing the subject with practiced ease. But I noticed it, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his gaze flickered to the side as though he could escape the conversation if he simply ignored it. It was subtle, but I could feel it. And every time, I felt that small, gnawing pang of guilt. Was I pushing him too much? Was I asking for too much too soon? Yet, despite all my attempts at rationalizing it, frustration began to bubble inside me. It was like a pressure that never ceased, constantly building up without release. His parents, in their own way, were no less curious, though they approached the topic with a quieter, more reserved curiosity. Whenever we visited them, his mother, ever the polite observer, would casually inquire about our plans for the future. "You two make such a lovely couple," she'd say, her voice warm but carefully measured, her eyes sharp, always watching. "Have you thought about taking the next step?" It was the same question, but wrapped in gentleness, a question that hovered between us, unspoken but ever present. His father, on the other hand, kept his distance from the conversation, but occasionally, in a light-hearted tone, would share his own reflections about married life, usually in the form of an old story or a joke. But it didn't matter if it came from my side of the family or his, it was clear that the pressure was mounting. It seeped into every corner of our relationship, unspoken but undeniable. Mark, for all his calm and collected exterior, seemed to retreat into himself. There were moments, particularly during the quiet ones when no one was speaking, when I'd catch him staring into the distance, his mind far away, lost in thought. It was as though something inside him had shifted, and I didn't know what it was. I wanted to ask him what was going on in his mind, what he was feeling. But a small voice in me, one laced with fear, warned that I might not like what I would hear. The days dragged on, and with each passing moment, my internal struggle deepened. On one side, I understood him, I knew he needed time, space, the assurance that he was making the right decision. After all, I loved him deeply, and the last thing I wanted was to push him too far, too fast. But on the other hand, I was exhausted. Exhausted from waiting, from the uncertainty, from not knowing where we stood. Was I being unreasonable to want some clarity? To want to know that we were moving forward, together, toward the same future? The confusion made my heart ache with an intensity one could barely put into words. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I decided to bring it up again, though this time I would be more subtle, easing it into the conversation. We were watching a romantic movie, one of those where everything ends with a grand, sweeping proposal. As the credits rolled, I shifted closer to Mark, wrapping myself around him, trying to create a moment of intimacy. "Isn't it wonderful," I said, my voice soft, "how they knew they wanted to spend their lives together? It must be such a relief to have that kind of certainty." Mark smiled, but said nothing. The silence between us was thick, a wall that grew taller with every passing second. I could feel the tension, thick like smoke, swirling around us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing at the edge of something, teetering on the brink. Taking a deep breath, I pressed on, my voice barely above a whisper. "I sometimes wonder what our wedding would be like. Do you ever think about it?" His hesitation was almost palpable, his response slow, deliberate. "I do think about it, Emily," he said quietly, "but I don't know. I'm not sure we're ready for that step yet." His words hit me like a punch. The sting was immediate and sharp, and before I could stop it, Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to ask him why, to demand an explanation, but something inside me held back. I didn't want to push him away. Instead, I nodded, trying with all my might to hide the disappointment that threatened to spill out. The silence between us felt deafening. The days that followed only seemed to amplify the tension. Friends began to ask about our future too, in those casual, probing ways that made my skin crawl. "You two have been together for so long," they'd say, as if we were already living in the future they were envisioning for us. "When are you going to make it official?" Each question was like another needle, poking at the fragile hopes I clung to, breaking them down piece by piece. Then came the night with my parents. The conversation, of course, circled back to the same tired question: marriage. My mother, never one to mince words, came straight to the point. "Emily, Mark," she said, her voice sharp but caring, "it's high time you two start thinking seriously about marriage. You're not getting any younger, and we'd love to see some grandkids." Mark's face drained of color, his usual deflection coming too late. I could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders. It was becoming too much for him to bear, and I couldn't just sit by anymore. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice steady but firm, "we appreciate your concern, but we're taking things one step at a time. We'll make that decision when we're ready." Later that night, as we lay in bed, I felt the distance between us. It was a quiet kind of distance, the kind that can only be felt, not seen. I turned to him, knowing the weight of his silence. "I'm sorry if this has been too much for you," I whispered. I didn't mean to add to the pressure. He sighed deeply, and for the first time in a while, he let his guard down. "It's not just you, Emily," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "It's everyone. I feel like I'm being pulled in all directions, and I don't know what to do. I love you, but I need to feel sure about this." His words offered some comfort, but the uncertainty remained. It lingered like a fog between us, clouding the space where our future should have been. I nodded, my own heart heavy. I wanted to believe that we were on the same page, that we wanted the same things. "I just want to know that we're on the same page," I said quietly. "That we both want the same things." "I do want the same things," he replied softly. "I just need more time to feel ready." Those words, though comforting, didn't erase the uncertainty that remained. The tension continued to build, a pressure I could no longer ignore. It was a constant reminder that sooner or later, we would have to face it. That conversation, the one we had been avoiding, loomed closer with every passing day. And then, one evening, it all came to a head. The build-up, the doubt, the endless waiting, it all led to this moment. I knew it was time. I could no longer wait in this state of limbo. I needed answers, even if they weren't the ones I wanted to hear. I spent the entire afternoon pacing, rehearsing my words, trying to find the right tone, the right way to ask without sounding too desperate, too demanding. Mark came home, his usual smile in place, but I could feel the difference. My heart raced, my resolve firming. I couldn't back down now. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I was about to say, "we need to talk." Truly felt like I was drowning in confusion. How could I have been so wrong? Sarah listened patiently, her arms wrapped around me, offering the comfort I desperately needed. "You're not a fool," she said softly, her voice steady, even as I trembled with emotion. "This isn't about you being wrong, Emily. It's about him not being ready, and that's his issue, not yours." I wiped my tears, nodding, trying to process her words. But the knot in my chest wouldn't loosen. "I don't know how to move forward from this," I admitted, my voice shaky. "One step at a time," Sarah reassured me. "You don't need all the answers right now. But you need to take care of you first." The words settled around me like a blanket, warm and comforting. But inside, there was still that cold, gnawing doubt. How long was I supposed to wait? What was I waiting for? We talked for hours, Sarah helping me sift through my tangled emotions. I shared my frustrations, my dreams of a future I thought we both wanted. It was like I was carrying this weight on my shoulders, and every word I spoke was another burden I could release. But at the same time, each release left a space, a void. Was it time to let go? Was it time to walk away from something that had once felt so right? When I finally left Sarah's apartment, I still didn't have the answers. But I did know one thing for certain: I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness, my future, for the chance that Mark might one day be ready. That night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling, but this time I felt a strange sense of clarity. My heart still ached, but the weight of uncertainty was a little lighter. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, or the next day, or the one after that. But I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo. The only person I could truly rely on was myself, and I needed to make choices that honored my own needs. As I drifted off to sleep, I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing: it was time to find my own path, even if it meant walking it alone. I had no idea if he still loved me, or if I was just convenient for him now. The thought gnawed at me, tearing at the fabric of everything I thought I knew. Sarah listened intently, her gaze locked on mine, a mix of empathy and quiet anger clouding her features. "Emily, you're not a fool," she said firmly, her voice steady but sharp, like a lifeline in the sea of confusion. "You've been honest about what you want from the start. If he's not ready, that's on him, not you. You deserve someone who's as committed to you as you are to them." Her words stung in a way that was both reassuring and heartbreaking. I wanted to believe her, I truly did, but self-doubt clung to me like a shadow. What if I wasn't enough for him? What if I was just holding on to something he didn't care about, waiting for someone better to come along? Sarah shook her head, a fierce, protective energy in her movement. "No, don't do that to yourself," she insisted. "You are more than enough, Emily. If he can't see that, then maybe he's not the right person for you. You deserve someone who recognizes your worth and is excited to build a future with you." I clung to her words, a flicker of hope fighting against the storm of doubt. We spent the rest of the day together, talking, reflecting, with Sarah's unwavering support wrapping around me like a blanket, though the pain still lingered. The raw ache in my chest wouldn't let up. Over the following days, I opened up to others, close friends, family members, each conversation offering a blend of sympathy and advice, like different pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. My mother, ever the pragmatist, cut to the heart of things. "Emily, you have to decide what's best for you," she urged. "If he's not ready now, he might never be. Don't waste your life waiting for someone who can't commit." Her words felt like ice, sharp and cold, but they carried weight. My father, on the other hand, was more hopeful. "Maybe he just needs more time, sweetheart," he suggested, his voice gentle. 5 years is a long time, but everyone has their own timeline. If you love him, maybe it's worth waiting a bit longer. Their conflicting advice left me spinning, torn between hope and resignation. Part of me wanted to believe that Mark would come around, that with just a little more time, he would be ready, that he would see me and the life we had built together as the future he wanted. But another part of me, the part that had been waiting for years, knew I couldn't keep holding my life hostage, waiting for him to make up his mind. The quiet moments when I was alone were the hardest. That's when the questions crept in, and the past 5 years unfolded like a movie reel in my mind. I remembered our first date, the way we talked for hours, laughing and sharing everything, as if we'd known each other for lifetimes. I thought of the spontaneous trips to the beach, where we would lose track of time, just enjoying each other's company. The nights spent curled up together, watching TV, completely content. Those memories, those simple moments, felt like they came from a different life, a life that now seemed so far away. But then there were the challenges, the dark spots that clouded the beauty. The time Mark lost his job, fell into a deep depression, and I had to hold him together when he couldn't do it himself. The endless arguments about his long work hours and how I felt like I was being left behind. The moments when he seemed distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It became clear, our relationship had always had its ups and downs. But were those down moments simply part of the normal ebb and flow, or did they hint at something deeper? Something fundamental that we couldn't overcome? Was I clinging to the good, turning a blind eye to the red flags waving in the distance? I knew I needed clarity, so I called Mark's sister, Lisa. Over the years, she had become more than just his family to me. She had become a friend, someone I could confide in without judgment. When I walked into her home, she welcomed me with open arms, offering me a cup of tea and an understanding look that immediately made me feel less alone. "Lisa," I started, my voice trembling with uncertainty, "I'm so confused. Mark says he's not ready to marry me yet, that he needs more time, but I don't understand why. Do you have any idea what's going on with him?" Lisa took a deep breath, her gaze thoughtful, as if searching for the right words. "Emily," she said softly, "I know my brother loves you. He talks about you all the time. He's told me how much you mean to him. But Mark's always been cautious, especially with big decisions. He overthinks everything, worries about making the wrong choice." Her words hung in the air, but I couldn't shake my frustration. "But we've been together for 5 years, I said, my voice rising. How can he not know if I'm the right person by now?" Lisa looked at me with sympathy, her eyes filled with the kind of understanding that only comes from knowing someone deeply. "I think he's scared," she admitted. "Our parents had a rough marriage, and I think that's affected him more than he lets on. He doesn't want to end up in a situation where he feels trapped or unhappy. He needs to be absolutely sure before he takes that step." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never considered how his parents' troubled marriage might have shaped his fears, his reluctance to commit. It made sense, but it didn't make the situation any easier to bear. "Do you think he'll ever be ready?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the vulnerability in my question breaking through. "I wish I could give you a definitive answer," Lisa said, her voice soft, almost regretful. "But I can't. Only Mark can decide that. What I can tell you is that he loves you, and he's not trying to hurt you. He's just dealing with his own fears and uncertainties." I left Lisa's house feeling both a little lighter and heavier at the same time. I understood Mark's fears a little more, but the uncertainty still lingered like a dark cloud. Over the next few days, I found myself in a kind of limbo, my emotions swaying wildly between hope and despair. I missed Mark terribly, but I knew I needed to give myself space, to think clearly and make the best decision for me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the emptiness around me felt overwhelming. I pulled out a journal, something I hadn't done in years, and began writing. I wrote about everything, about the love we shared, about the dreams we had built, about my deepest fears and doubts. The act of writing felt like therapy, the words pouring out like a release, helping me process everything I couldn't yet put into words. Through it, I realized something important: my self-worth could not be tied to Mark's readiness to marry me. I was a strong, independent woman with my own dreams, my own goals. I had built a life I was proud of. I couldn't let my happiness hinge on someone else's decision. But even as I wrote those words, a part of me knew that letting go would be the hardest thing I would ever do. I needed to decide, was I willing to wait for him, to give him the time he needed, or did I need to move on and find someone who was ready to build a future with me? I spent hours talking to friends, family, gathering their perspectives, weighing the options. Some urged patience, some insisted I deserved more. In the end, I knew the decision had to come from within. I had to listen to my heart, no matter how much it ached. I took a few more days to reflect, to meditate, to connect with myself on a deeper level. I needed to clear my mind, to trust my instincts. The decision wasn't easy, nothing about this had been, but finally, I knew what I had to do. It was painful, but it was the only choice I could make for my own happiness, for my future. I called Mark, asking him to meet me at the park. The place where we had shared so many happy moments, where the weight of our love once felt so light. When he arrived, his eyes were full of worry, and the tension in the air was thick. "Emily, I've missed you," he said softly, his voice low and filled with longing. "I've missed you too," I replied, taking his hand. The warmth of his touch brought back memories I wasn't ready to face, but I knew there was something we had to confront. "But we need to talk." We sat down on the same bench where we had spent countless hours, and I took a deep breath. The words were heavy, but they had to be said. Mark, I love you more than words can express. These past 5 years have been the happiest of my life. But I can't keep living in uncertainty. I need to know that we're moving forward. That we're building a future together. He nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. I understand, Emily. I'm so sorry for all the hurt I've caused you. I never wanted to hurt you. I've been thinking a lot, and I realized fear was holding me back, but I don't want to lose you. His words offered a flicker of hope, but the question I had been holding on to, the question that had been eating away at me for so long, was still unanswered. I had to ask. Mark, I need you to be honest with me. Do you see yourself marrying me? Can you make that commitment? The silence that followed felt like an eternity. His gaze locked with mine, and I could see the uncertainty clouding his eyes. Emily, I can't, he said finally, his voice breaking. I'm not sure yet whether I want to marry you or not. I've been thinking a lot these past few days, but I still haven't found the answer. I'm not sure I can do it. I've never thought about this, about being a future husband or father. I went silent, the weight of his words sinking deep into me. Tears filled my eyes, and the sharpness in my chest was almost unbearable. My breath became shallow, like my world was collapsing. And then, I screamed. I've been waiting for you for 5 years, Mark. You promised me so many things. In that moment, I couldn't stay there anymore. I ran out of the house, the overwhelming flood of emotions too much to contain. I drove to the park, the only place I knew I could be alone. I cried like a baby, my body trembling with each sob, the park empty, save for the darkening sky above me. The sun was setting, casting a deep shade of blue over everything. It felt like the world was fading away, like the future I had built with Mark, the dreams we had shared, were disintegrating in an instant. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I couldn't face anyone right now. All I needed was to let the pain pour out of me, to scream into the empty space around me. How had we come to this? After what felt like hours, I finally stopped crying. My body, exhausted from the emotional release, slumped against the bench. I stared at the dark sky, struggling to gather my thoughts. I couldn't stay there forever. I had to figure out what to do next. I reached for my phone, seeing several missed calls and messages. Mark, Sarah, my mother. I took a deep breath and decided to call Sarah. She answered on the first ring. Emily, are you okay? Where are you? Her voice was full of concern, almost panicked. I'm at the park, I said, my voice shaky. I couldn't stay at the house. I understand, she replied gently. Do you want me to come over? Yes, please, I whispered, a wave of relief sweeping over me. The thought of not being alone in this moment gave me some comfort. Within minutes, Sarah arrived and found me sitting on the bench. Without a word, she wrapped me in a hug, and for the first time that day, I felt some of the tension in my chest ease. We sat together, the silence enveloping us like a blanket. Her presence was a balm to my wounded heart. Emily, she finally spoke, her voice steady and reassuring. You deserve someone who is sure about you, someone who is ready to commit and build a future with you. I nodded, tears welling up again, but I knew she was right. But it still hurts. I thought Mark was that person. I know it does, Sarah said softly, her words cutting through the pain. But you have to take care of yourself. You can't keep waiting for him to figure out what he wants. It's not fair to you. Her words dug deep into me, and I realized how long I had been putting my life on hold. I had been waiting for Mark to decide while neglecting my own needs. I needed to move forward, even if that meant leaving him behind. The next few days were a blur. I spent time with friends and family, seeking their advice and support. My parents were understanding, though my mother couldn't hide her disappointment in Mark. You deserve better, Emily, she told me firmly. Don't settle for someone who isn't sure about you. I took long walks, journaled my thoughts, and even began seeing a therapist to help me process everything. The pain was still there, but slowly, I started to feel a sense of clarity. One evening, I found myself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where I had broken down just days before. But this time, something had changed. I felt stronger, more in control of my own destiny. I realized that while I still loved Mark, I couldn't wait for him forever. I had to prioritize my own happiness. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Can we talk?" it read. I hesitated, then replied, "Okay." We met at a coffee shop, and as soon as I saw him, I could see the turmoil in his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Emily," he began, his voice raw. "I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. These past few days have been hell without you. I've done a lot of thinking, and I realize that I can't lose you. I'm ready to commit to marrying you if you'll still have me." His words were sincere, but there was something in my heart that told me I couldn't make a decision based on his sudden change of heart. I needed to be sure, for both of us. "Mark," I said softly, my voice steady but filled with emotion, "I appreciate what you're saying, but I need time. I need to focus on myself and make sure that this is what I truly want. We both need to be sure." He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand. I'll wait for you, Emily. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm ready." That night, we parted ways, not knowing what the future held. But I knew one thing: I had taken control of my happiness, and no matter what came next, I was ready to face it. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rediscovering myself. I took up new hobbies, spent time with loved ones, and continued my therapy sessions. Slowly, I began to feel more like myself again. Mark and I kept in touch, but I made it clear that I needed space to figure things out. He respected my wishes, giving me the time and distance I needed. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I realized something that had eluded me for so long. No matter what happened with Mark, I would be okay. I had learned to value myself and my own happiness above all else. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that uncertainty. I knew that whatever came next, I was strong enough to handle it. And that was enough for me.